Hey folks, so something I do off and on, I haven't done it in quite a while, but doing it again now, is I read stuff. And read, let's see, American Fairy Tales, which pretty outstanding, done by the same guy who did Wizard of Oz, Alfred Baum, and pretty interesting critique of what was going on in that time. And Percy Shelley, read a lot of when I was in college, read off and on, and I just recently used this particular poem, at least fragments of it, in a D&D campaign where it was sort of the prophecies that drove things. And this is a dry read. I had some training as an actor back when I was in college, but I am not a voice actor by any stretch of the imagination, although I enjoy reading aloud and I enjoy role playing. And this is a dry read. I haven't read this aloud before, but I figured I would dive into it and it would be good for me, good exercise for me, and perhaps entertaining to some of you. So I'm going to drink my tea and read a poem aloud. And give you some context, I grew up on a farm in upstate New York, and my mother was literary in the best sense of the word. She never finished college, but she loved books. She gave me the Iliad to read when I was like 8 or 9. We would read Shakespeare aloud to each other. She wrote a lot of poetry and soaked me in this vast pool of just sort of Western heritage with some stuff from me sprinkled in too that really I think has helped me be a better person and a better citizen. But anyhow, a little bit of romantic poetry for today, and I don't know if I'll plow through all of this, but most certainly I'm going to enjoy a chunk of it, and I hope you do too. So it starts out to Harriet. Whose is the love that gleaming through the world wards off the poisonous arrow of its scorn? Whose is the warm and partial praise, virtue's most sweet reward? Beneath whose looks did my reviving soul, riper in truth and virtuous daring grow, whose eyes I have gazed fondly on and loved mankind the more. Harriet, on thine, thou wert my purer mind. Thou wert the inspiring of my song, thine are these early wildling flowers, though garlanded by me, then press into thy breast this pledge of love. And know, though time may change and years may roll, each floweret gathered in my heart it consecrates to thine. Queen Mab. 1. How wonderful is death, death and his brother sleep, one pale and yonder is waning moon, with lips of lurid blue, the other rosy as the moon, with throated on the ocean's wave, it blushes o'er the world, yet both so pathing wonderful hath then the glooming power, whose reign is in the tainted sepulchre, seizes on her sinless soul. Must then that peerless form which love and admiration cannot view without a beating heart, those azure veins, which steal like streams along a field of snow, that lovely outline which is fair as breathing marble perish? Must putrefacition's breath leave nothing of this heavenly sight, but loathsomeness and ruin? Spare nothing but a gloomy theme on which the lightest heart might moralize? Or is it only a sweet slumber stealing o'er sensation, which the breath of roseate morning closeth into darkness? Will, on, will I wake again, and give that faithful bosom joy, whose sleepless spirit waits to catch light, life, and rapture from her smile? Yes, she will wake again, although her glowing limbs are motionless, and silent those sweet lips, once breathing eloquence, that might have soothed a tiger's rage or thawed the cold heart of a conqueror. Her dewy eyes are closed, and on their lids, whose texture fine scarce hides the dark blue orbs beneath, the baby sleep is pillowed. Her golden tresses shade the bosom's stainless pride, curling like tendrils of the parasite around the marble column. Hark, whence that rushing sound? 'Tis like the wondrous strain that round a lonely ruin dwells, which, wandering on the echoing shore, the enthusiast hears at evening. 'Tis softer than the west wind sigh, 'tis wilder than the unmeasured notes of that strange lyre whose strings the genie of the breeze sweep. Those lines of rainbow light are like the moonbeams where they fall through some cathedral window, but the tints are such as may not find comparison on earth. Behold the chariot of the fairy queen. Celestial coursers paw the unyielding air, their filmy pennons at her word they furl, and stop obedient to the reins of light. These are the queen, these the queen of spells drew in. She spread a charm around the spot, and leaning graceful from the ethereal car, long did she gaze, and silently upon the slumbering maid. Oh, not the vision poet in his dreams, when silvery clouds float through the wildered brain, with every sight of lovely, wild and grand astonishes and raptures elevates, when fancy as glance combines the wondrous and the beautiful. So bright, so fair, so wild a shape hath ever yet beheld, is that which reigned the courses of the air, and poured the magic of her gaze upon the maiden sleep. The broad and yellow moon shone dimly through her form, that form of faultless symmetry. The pearly and pellucid car moved not the moonlight's line. 'Twas not an earthly pageant. Those who had looked upon the sight, passing all human glory, saw not the yellow moon, saw not the mortal scene, heard not the night's wind's rush, heard not the earthly sound, saw but the fairy pageant, heard but the heavenly strains that filled the lonely dwelling. The fairy's frame was slight, yon fibrous cloud that catches but the palest tinge of even, and which the straining eye can hardly seize when melting into eastern twilight shadow, were scarce so thin, so slight, but the fair star that gems the glittering coronet of morn sheds not a light so mild, so powerful, as that which, bursting from the fairy's form, spreads a purpureal halo round the scene, yet with an undulating motion swayed to her outline gracefully. From her celestial car the fairy queen descended, and thrice she waved her hand, circled with wreaths of amaranth. Her thin and misty form moved with moving air, and the clear silver tones, and thus she spoke, were such as unheard by all but gifted ear. Fairy, stars, your balmiest influence shed. Elements, your wrath suspend, sleep, ocean, and the rocky bounds that circle thy domain. Not out of breath be seen to stir around yon grass-grown ruin's height. Let even the restless gossamer sleep on the moveless air. Soul of Ayant thou, judged alone worthy of the envied boon, that waits the good and sincere, that waits those who struggle, and with resolute will, vanquished earth's pride and meanness, burst the icy chains of custom, and have shown the day stars of their age. Soul of Ayant, awake, arise. Sudden arose Iant's soul. It stood, all beautiful in naked purity, the perfect semblance of its bodily frame. Instinct with inexpressible beauty and grace, each stain of earthliness had passed away. It reassumed its native dignity and stood, immortal amid ruin. Upon the couch the body lay, wrapped in the depth of slumber. Its features were fixed and meaningless, animal life was there, and every organ yet performed its natural functions. 'Twas a sight of wonder to behold the body and soul. The selfsame lineaments, the selfsame marks of identity were there, yet oh how different! One aspires to heaven, pants it for its some paternal heritage, and ever changing, ever rising still, wantons in endless being. The other, for a time, the unwilling sport of circumstance and passion, struggles on, fleets through its sad duration rapidly, then, like an useless and worn-out machine, rots, perishes, and passes. Fairy. Spirit, who hast dived so deep, Spirit, who hast soared so high, thou the fearless, thou the mild, accept the boon thy worth hath earned. Ascend the car with me. Spirit. Do I dream? Is this new feeling but a vision ghost of slumber? If indeed I am a soul, a free, disembodied soul, speak again to me, the fairy says. I am the fairy Mab. To me 'tis given the wonders of the human world to keep, the secrets of immeasurable past, and the unfailing consciousness of men, those stern, unflattering chroniclers I find, the future from the causes which arise in each event I gather, not the sting which retributive memory implants in the hard bosom of the selfish man, nor the ecstatic and exulting throb which virtue's votary feels when he sums up the thoughts and actions of a well-spent day, are unforeseen, unregistered by me. And it is yet permitted me to rend the veil of mortal frailty, that the spirit, clothed in its changeless purity, may know how soon to accomplish the great end for which it hath its bearing, and may taste that peace which in the end of life will share. This is the meed of virtue, happy soul. Ascend the car with me. The chains of earth's allurement fell from Ayant's spirit. They shrank and brake like bandages of straw beneath a wakened giant's strength. She knew her glorious change, and felt in apprehension uncontrolled, new rapture's opening sound. Each dream of her mortal life, each frenzy visioned of the slumbers that close each well-spent day, seemed now to meet reality. The fairy and the soul proceeded, the silver clouds disparted, and as the car of magic they ascended, against the speechless music dwelled. Against the coursers of the air unfurled their azure pennants, and the queen, shaking the beamy reins, bade them pursue their way. The magic car moved, the night was fair, and countless stars studded heaven's blue vault. Just o'er the eastern wave peeped the first faint smile of morn. The magic car moved on from the celestial hoofs. The atmosphere in flaming sparkles flew, and where the burning wheels eddied above the mountain's loftiest peak was traced a line of lightning. Now it flew far above the rock, the utmost verge of earth, the rival of the Andes, whose dark brow lowered o'er the silver sea. Far below the chariot's path, calm as a slumbering babe, tremendous ocean lay. The mirror of its stillness showed the pale and waning stars, the chariot's fiery track, and the grey light of morn tinging those fleecy clouds that canopied the dawn. Seemed it, the chariot's way lay through the midst of an immense concave, radiant with million constellations, tinged with shades of infinite color, and semicircled with a belt flashing incessant meteors. The magic car moved on. As they approached the goal, the courser seemed to gather speed. The sea no longer was distinguished. Earth appeared a vast and shadowy sphere. The sun's unclouded orb rolled through the black concave. Its rays of rapid light parted around the chariot's swifter course, and fell like ocean's feathery spray dashed from the boiling surge. Before a vessel's prow, the magic car moved on. Earth's distant orb appeared, the smallest light that twinkles in the heaven, whilst round the chariot's way innumerable systems rolled, and countless spheres diffused. An ever-varying glory. It was a sight of wonder. Some were horned like the crescent moon. Some shed a mild and silver beam like Hesperus or the western ocean. Some dashed athwart with trains of flame like the worlds of death and ruin driven. Some shone like suns, and as the chariot passed, eclipsed all other light. Spirit of nature, here! In this interminable wilderness of worlds at whose immensity even soaring fancy staggers, here is thy fitting temple. Yet not the lightest leaf that quivers to the passing breeze is less instinct with thee. Yet not the meanest worm that lurks in graves and fattens on the dead, less shares thy eternal breath. Spirit of nature, thou, imperishable as this scene, here is thy fitting temple. 2. If solitude hath ever led thy steps to the wild ocean's echoing shore, and thou hast lingered there until the sun's orb seemed resting on the burnished wave, thou must have marked the lines of purple gold that motionless hung o'er the sinking sphere. Thou must have marked the billowy clouds, edged with intolerable radiancy, towering like rocks of jet, crowned with diamond wreath, and yet there is a moment when the sun's highest point peeps like a star o'er ocean's western edge, when those far clouds of feathery gold, shaded with deepest purple, gleam like islands on a dark blue sea. Then has thy fancy soared above the earth, and furled its wearied wing within the fairy's fane. Yet not the golden islands, gleaming in yon flood of light, nor the feathery curtains stretching o'er the sun's bright couch, paving the gorgeous dome, so fair, so wondrous a sight as Mab's ethereal palace could afford. Yet likest evening's vault that fairy hall, as heaven low resting on the wave, it spread its floors of flashing light and vast an azure dome, its fertile golden islands floating on a silver sea, while suns their mingling beaming darted through clouds of circumambient darkness, and pearly battlements around looked o'er the immense of heaven. The magic car no longer moved. The fairy and the spirit entered the hall of spells, those golden clouds that rolled in glittering billows beneath the azure canopy. With ethereal footsteps trembled not the light and crimson mist, floating to strains of thrilling melody, through that unearthly dwelling, yielded to every movement of the will. Upon their passive swell the spirit leaned, and, for the varied bliss that pressed round, used not the glorious privilege of virtue and wisdom. Spirit, the fairy said, and pointed to the gorgeous dome, this is wondrous sight, and mocks all human grandeur. But were it virtue's only meed to dwell in celestial palace, all resigned to pleasurable impulses immured with the prison of itself, the will of changeless nurture would be unfulfilled. Learn to make others happy. Spirit, come. This is thine high reward. The past shall rise. Thou shalt hold present. I will teach the secret of the future. The fairy and the spirit, approaching the o'erhanging battlement,
Below lay stretched to the universe. There, as far as the remotest line that bounds imagination's flight, countless unending orbs in mazy motion intermingled, yet still, immutably eternal nature's laws, above, below, around, the circling systems formed a wilderness of harmony. Each, with undeviating aim and eloquent silence through the depths of space, pursued its wondrous way. There was a little light that twinkled in the misty distance. None but a spirit's eye might ken that rolling orb. None but a spirit's eye, and in no other place but the celestial dwelling, might behold each action of this earth's inhabitants. But matter, space, and time, and who those ethereal mansions, cease to act. And all prevailing wisdom, when it reaps the harvest of its excellence, o'erbounds those obstacles of which an earthly soul fears to attempt the conquest. The fairy pointed to the earth. The spirit's intellectual eye its kindred beings recognized. The thronging thousands to a passing view seemed like an ant-hill citizens. How wondrous that even the passions, prejudice, interests, the sway, the meanest being, the weak touch that moves from the finest nerve, and in one human brain causes the faintest thought, becomes a link in the great nature of nature. Behold, the fairy cried, Palmyra's ruined palaces. Behold where grandeur frowned. Behold where pleasure smiled. What now remains? The memory of senselessness and shame. What is immortal there? Nothing. It stands to tell a melancholy tale, to give an awful warning. Soon oblivion will steal silently to the remnant of its fame. Monarchs and conquerors there, proud or prostrate, millions trod. The earthquake of the human race, like them, forgotten when the ruin that marks their shock is past. Beside the eternal Nile, the pyramids have risen. Now shall pursue his changeless sway. Those pyramids shall fall. Yea, not a stone shall stand to tell the spot whereon they stood. Their very site shall be forgotten, as is their builder's name. Beyond yon sterile spot, where now the wandering Arab tents flap in the desert blast, there once old Salem's haughty fane reared high to heaven at its thousand golden domes, and in the blessing face of day exposed its shameful glory. Oh, many a widow, many a orphan cursed the building of that fane, and many a father, worn out with toil and slavery, implored the poor man's God to sweep it from the earth, and spare his children the detested task of piling stone on stone, and poisoning the choicest day of life to soothe the dotard's vanity. There an unhuman and uncultured race howled hideous praises to their demon God. Dude, is this Fox News? They rushed to war, tore from the mother's womb the unborn child. Old age and infancy promiscuous perished. The victor's arms left not a soul to breathe. Oh, they were fiends. But what was he who taught them that the God of nature and benevolence hath given a special sanction to the trade of blood? His name and theirs are fading, and the tales of this barbarian nation, which imposture recites till terror credits, are pursuing itself into forgetfulness. Where Athens, Rome, and Sparta stood, there is a moral desert now. The mean and miserable huts, the yet more wretched place, are contrasted with those ancient fanes, now crumbling to oblivion. The long and lovely colonnades, through which the ghost of freedom stalks. Seems like a well-known tune, which in some dear scene we have loved to hear. Remember how in sadness, but oh, how much more changed, how gloomier is the contrast of human nature there. Where Socrates expired, a tyrant slaved, a coward and a fool spreads death around, then shuddering meets his own. Where Cicero and Antoninus lived, a cowed and hypocritical monk prays, curses, and deceives. Spirit, 10,000 years have scarcely passed away, since in the waste where now the savage drinks his enemy's blood, and aping Europe's sons wakes the unholy song of war. Arose a stately city, metropolis to the western continent. There now the mossy column stood, indented by Tom's unrelaxing grip, which once appeared to brave all save its country's ruin. There the wide forest scene, rude in uncultivated loveliness, of gardens long run wild, seems to the unwilling sojourner, whose steps chance in that desert has delayed, thus to have stood earth as what it is. Yet once it was the busiest haunt, whether as to common centre flock strangers and ships and merchandise, once peace and freedom blessed. Once a cultivated plain, but wealth that curse of man, blighted the bud of its prosperity, virtue and wisdom, truth and liberty fled to return not until man shall know that they alone can give the bliss worthy that a soul claims, its kindred with eternity. There's not one atom of yon earth but once was living man, nor the minutest drop of rain that hangeth in its thinnest cloud but flowed in human veins. And from the burning plains where Libyan monsters yell, from the most gloomy glens of Greenland's sunless clime, to where the golden fields of fertile England spread their harvest to the day, thou canst not find one spot whereon no city stood. How strange is human pride! I tell thee that those living things to whom the fragile blade of grass, that springeth in the morn and perisheth ere noon, is an unbounded world. I tell thee those viewless beings whose mansion is the smallest particle of the impassive atmosphere, think and live like man. That their affections and antipathies like his produce the laws ruling their moral state, and the minutest throb that through their frame diffuses the slightest, faintest motion, is fixed and indispensable as the majestic laws that roll yon rolling orbs. The fairy paused. The spirit, an ecstasy of admiration, felt all knowledge of the past revived, the events of old and wondrous times, which dim tradition interruptedly teaches the credulous vulgar, were unfolded in just perspective to the view, dim from their infinitude. The spirit seemed to stand high on an isolated pinnacle, the flood of ages combating below, the depth of the unbounded universe above, and all nature's unchanging harmony. 3. Fairy, the spirit said, and on the queen of spells fixed her ethereal eyes. I thank thee, thou hast given a boon which I will not resign, and taught a lesson not to be unlearned. I know the past, and thence I will essay to glean a warning for the future, so that man may profit by his errors and derive experience from his folly. For when the power of imparting joy is equal to the will, the human soul requires no other heaven. Mab, turn thee, surpassing spirit, much yet remains unscanned. Thou knowest how great is man, thou knowest his imbecility. Yet learn thou what he is, yet learn the lofty destiny, which restless time prepares for every living soul. Behold a gorgeous palace that amid yon populous city rears its thousand towers, and seems itself a city. Gloomy troops of sentinels in stern and silent ranks encompass it around. The dweller there cannot be free and happy. Hearest thou not the curses of the fatherless, the groans of those who have no friend? He passes on. The king, the wearer of a gilded chain that binds his whole to abjectness, the fool whom courtiers nickname monarch, whilst a slave even to the basest appetites, that man is not the shriek of penury. He smiles at the deep curses which the destitute mutter in secret, and a sullen joy pervades his bloodless heart when thousands groan, but for those martials which his wantonness wastes in unjoyous revelry, to save all that they love from famine. When he hears the tale of war, to some ready-made face of hypocritical assents he turns, smothering the glow of shame that spite of him floats his bloated cheek. Now the meal, of silence, grandeur, and excess, he drags his pallid, unwitnessing appetite. If gold gleaming round and numerous viands, called from every clime, could force the loathing sense to overcome satiety, if wealth, the spring it draws from poisons not, or vice, unfeeling, stubborn vice, converteth not its food to deadliest venom, then the king is happy, and the peasant who fulfills his unforced task when he returns at even, and by the blazing faggots meets again her unwelcome for who all his toil is sped, tastes not a sweeter meal. Behold him now, stretched on the gorgeous couch, his fevered brain reels dizzily awhile, but too soon. The slumber of intemperances subsides, and conscious that a dying serpent calls her venomous blood to their nocturnal task. Listen, he speaks. Oh, mark that frenzy die. Oh, mark that deadly vision. King. No cessation. Oh, must this last forever? Awful death, I wish, yet fear to clasp thee. Not one moment of dreamless sleep. O dear and blessed peace, why dost thou shroud thy vestal purity and penury in dungeons? Wherefore lurkest with danger, death, and solitude, yet sunk the palace I have built thee? Sacred peace, oh, visit me but once, but pitying shed one drop of balm upon my wildered soul. The fairy. Vain man, that palace is the virtuous heart, and peace defileth not her snowy robes in such a shed as thine. Hark! Yet he mutters, his slumbers are but varied agonies. They prey like scorpions on the spring of life. There needeth not hell that bigots frame to punish those who err. Earth in itself contains at once the evil and the cure, and all sufficing nature can chastise those who transgress her laws. She only knows how justly to proportionate the fault, the punishment its merits. It is strange that this poor wretch should pride him in his woe, take pleasure in his abjectness, and hug the scorpion that consumes him. It is strange that, placed on a conspicuous throne of thorns, a grasping iron sceptre, and immured within a splendid prison, whose stern bounds shut him from all that's goods dear on earth, his soul asserts not its humanity. That man's mild nature does not in war against a king's employ. No, 'tis not strange. He, like the vulgar, thinks, feels, and acts, lives just as his father did. The unconquered powers of precedent and custom interpose between a king and virtue. Stranger yet, to those who know not nature nor deduce their truth from the present, it may seem that not one slave who suffers from the crimes of his unnatural being, not one wretch whose children famish, and whose nuptial bed is earth's unpitying bosom, rears an arm to dash him from his throne. Those gilded flies that, basking in the sunshine of a court, fatten on its corruption, what are they? The drones of the community, they feed on the mechanic's labor. The starved hen for them compels the starboard glebe to yield its unshared harvest, and yon squalid form, leaner than fleshless misery, that wastes a sunless life and unwholesome mind, drags out in labor a protracted death to glut their grandeur. Many faint with toil, that few may know the cares and woes of sloth. Whence thou kings and parasites arose? Whence that unnatural lines of drones who heap toil on unvanquishable penury on those who build their palaces and bring their daily bread? From vice, black loathsome vice, from rapine, madness, treachery, and wrong, from all that genders misery and makes of earth this thorny wilderness, from lust, revenge, and murder. And when reason's voice, loud as the voice of nature, shall have waked the nations, and mankind perceive that vice is discord, war, and misery, that virtue is peace and happiness and harmony, when man's mature nature shall disdain the playthings of its childhood, kingly glare will lose its power to dazzle, its authority will silently pass, the gorgeous throne shall stand unnoticed, and the regal hall fast falling to decay, while falsehood's trade shall be as hateful and unprofitable as that of truth is now. Where is the fame which the vainglorious mighty of the earth seek to eternalize? Oh, the faintest sound from time's light footfall, the minutest wave that swells the flood of ages, whelms in nothing the unsubstantial bubble. Aye, today stern is the tyrant's mandate, red the gaze that flashes desolation, strong the arm that scatters multitude. Tomorrow comes. That mandate is a thunder peal that died in ages past, that gaze a transient flash on which the midnight closed, and that on arm the worm has made its meal. The virtuous man, who great in his humility, as kings are little in their grandeur, he who leads invincibly a life of resolute good, and stands amid the silent dungeon depths more free and fearless than the trembling judge, who clothed in venal power vainly strove to bind the impassive spirit, when he falls, his mild beams benevolence no more. Withered the hand outstretched but to relieve, sunk reason's simple eloquence that rolled but to appeal the guilty. Yes, the grave hath quenched that eye, and death's relentless froth withered that arm, but the unfading fame which virtue hangs upon its votary's tomb, the deathless memory of that man who kings call to their mind and tremble, the remembrance with which the happy spirit contemplates its well-spent pilgrimage on earth, shall never pass away. Nature rejects the monarch, not the man, the subject, not the citizen, for kings and subjects, mutual foes, forever play a losing game into each other's hands, whose stakes are vice and misery. The man, a virtuous soul, commands not nor obeys power like desolating pestilence, pollutes whatever it touches, and obedience, bane of all genius, virtue, freedom, and truth, makes slaves of men and of the human frame, a mechanized automaton. When Nero, high over flaming Rome, with savage joy, lowered like a fiend, drank with unraptured air the shrieks of agonizing death, beheld the frightful desolation spread, and felt new created sense within his soul, thrilled to the sight and vibrate to the sound, thus his grandeur has not overcome the force of human kindness. And when Rome, with one stern blow, hurled not the tyrant down, crushed not the arm red with dearest blood, had not submissive abjectness destroyed nature's suggestions? Look on yonder earth, The golden harvest spring, the unfailing sun sheds light and life, the fruits, the flowers, the trees. Arise in due succession, all things speak. Peace, harmony, and love, the universe and nature's silent eloquence declares that all fulfill the works of love and joy, all but the outcast man. He fabricates the sword which stabs his peace. He cherisheth the snakes that gnaw his art. He raiseth up the tyrant whose delight is in his woe, whose port is in his agony. Yon sun, light, is it the greatest alone? Yon silver beams sleep less sweetly on the cottage thatch than on the dome of kings. Is Mother Earth a stepdame to her numerous sons, who earn or unshared gifts with unremitting toil? A mother only to those puling babes who, nursed in ease and luxury, made men the playthings of their babyhood, and mar in self-important childness that peace which men alone appreciate? Spirit of nature, no. The pure diffusion of thy essence throbs alike at every human heart. Thou, erectest there thy throne of power unappealable. Thou art the judge beneath whose nod man's brief and frail authority is powerless as the wind that passeth idly by. Thine the tribunal which surpasseth the show of human justice, as God surpasseth man. Spirit of nature, the life of interminable multitudes, soul of those mighty spheres whose changeless pass through heaven's deep silence, soul of that smallest thing, the dwelling of whose life in one faint April sungleam, man, like these passive things, thy will consciously fulfilleth. Like theirs, his age of endless peace, which time is fast maturing, will swiftly, surely come, and the unbounded frame which thou pervadest will be without a flaw, marring its perfect symmetry. 4. How beautiful this night, the balmiest sigh which vernal zephyrs breathe in evening's air, with discord to the speaking quietude that wraps this moveless scene, heaven's ebon vault, studded with stars unutterably bright, through which the moon's unclouded grandeur rolls, seems like a panoply love had spread to curtain her sleeping world. Yon gentle hills robed in a garment of untrodden snow, yon darksome rocks when icicles depend so stainless that their white and glittering spires tinge not the moon's pure beam, yon castled steep, whose banner hangeth over time-worn towers so idly that rapt fancy deemeth it a metaphor of peace. I'll form a scene where musing solitude might love to lift her soul above this sphere of earthliness, where silence undisturbed might watch alone, so cold, so bright, so still. The orb of day in southern climes o'er ocean's waveless field sinks sweetly smiling. Not the faintest breath steals o'er the unruffled deep. The clouds of eve reflect unmoved the lingering beam of day, and vesper's image on the western main is beautifully still. Tomorrow comes. Cloud upon cloud in dark and deepening mass will o'er the blackened waters. The deep roar of distant thunder mutters awfully. Tempest unfolds its pinion o'er the gloom that shrouds the sprawling surge. The piteous fiend, with his winds and lightnings, tracks his prey. The torn deep yawns, the vessel finds a grave beneath its jagged gulf. Ah, whence yon glare that fires the arch of heaven? The dark red smoke blotting the silver moon. The stars are quenched in darkness, and the pure and spangling snow gleams faintly through the gloom that gathers round. Hark to that roar, whose swift and deafening peals and countless echoes through the mountains ring, startling pale midnight on her starry throne. Now swells the intermingling din, the jar frequent and frightful of the bursting bomb, the falling beam, the shriek, the groan, the shout, the ceaseless clangor and the rush of men inebriate with rage. Loud and more loud the discord grows, till pale death shuts the scene, and o'er the conqueror and conquered draws his cold and bloody shroud. Of all the men whom day's departing beams saw blooming there, in proud and vigorous health, of all the hearts that beat with anxious life at sunset there, how few survive, how few are beating now. All is deep silence, like the fearful calm that slumbers in the storm's portentous pause, save when the frantic wail of widowed love comes shuddering on the blast, or the faint moan with which some soul bursts from the frame of clay wrapped around its struggling powers. The gray morn dawns on the mournful sea, the sulphurous smoke before the icy wind slowly rolls away, and the bright beam of frosty morning dance along the spangling snow. There are tracks of blood even to the forest steps, and scattered arms, and lifeless warriors whose hard lineaments death's self could not change, mark the dreadful path of the outsailing victors. Far behind, Black ashes note where the proud city stood. Within yon forest is a gloomy glen. Each tree which guards its darkness from the day waves o'er a warrior's tomb. I see thee shrink, surpassing spirit. Were thou human else? I see a shade of doubt and horror fleet across thy stainless features, yet fear not. This is no unconnected misery, nor stands uncaused and irretrievable. Man's evil nature, that apology, which kings who rule and cowards who crowd set up for their unnumbered crimes, sheds not the blood which desolates the discord-wasted land. From kings and priests and statesmen war arose, whose safety in man's deep unbettered woe, whose grandeur his debasement let the axe strike at the root, the poison tree will fall. And where its invented exhalation spread, ruin and death and woe, while millions lay quenching the serpent's famine, and their bones, bleaching unburied in the putrid blast, a garden shall arise, and loveliness surpassing fabled Edom. Hath nature's soul, that formed this world so beautiful, that spread earth's lap with plenty, and life's smallest chords strung to unchanging unison, that gave the happy birds their dwelling in the grove, that yielded to the wanderers of the deep the lovely silence of unfathomed domain, and filled the meanest worm that crawls in dust with spirit, thought, and love on man alone? Partial in malice, wantonly heaped ruin, vice, slavery, his soul, blasted with earthly curses, placed far the meteor happiness that shuns his grasp, but serving on a faultful gulf to glare, rent wide beneath his footsteps? Nature! No. Kings, priests, and statesmen blast the human flower, even in its tender blood. Their influence darts like subtle poison through the bloodless veins of desolate society. The child, ere he can lisp his mother's sacred name, swells with the unnatural pride of crime, and lifts his baby sword, even in a hero's mood. This infant arm becomes the bloodiest scourge of devastated earth, while specious names learned in the soft childhood's unsuspecting hour serve as the false sophisms with which manhood dims bright reason's rays, and sanctifies the sword upraised to shed a brother's innocent blood. Let priest-slaves cease to proclaim that man inherits vice and misery when force and falsehood, even o'er the cradled babe, stifling with rudest grasp all natural good. Ah, to the stranger soul, when first it peeps from new tenement, and looks abroad for happiness and sympathy, how stern and desolate a tract is this wide world! How withered all the buds of natural good, no shade, no shelter from the sweeping storms of pitiless power, on its wretched frame, poisoned perchance by the disease and woe heaped on the wretched parents whence it sprang. By morals, law, and custom, the pure winds of heaven, that renovates the insect tribes, may breathe not. The untainting light of day may visit not its longings. It is bound ere it has life. Yea, all the chains are forged long ere its being. All liberty and love and peace is torn from its defenselessness. Cursed from its birth, even from the cradle, doomed to abjectness and bondage. Throughout this varied and eternal world, soul is the only element, the block that for uncounted ages has remained, the moveless pillar of a mountain's weight. It is active, living spirit. Every grain is sentient both in unity and part, and the minutest atom comprehends a world of loves and hatreds. These beget evil and good, hence truth and falsehood spring, hence will and thought and action, all the germs of pain or pleasure, sympathy or hate that variegate the eternal universe. Soul is not more polluted than the beams of heaven's pure orb, ere round their apid lines the taint of earthborn atmospheres arise. Man is of soul and body formed for deeds, of high resolve, on fancy's boldest wing to soar wearied, fearlessly to turn the keenest pangs to peacefulness, and taste the joys which mingled sense and spirit yield. Or he is formed for abjectness and woe, to grovel on the dunghill of his fears, to shrink at every round, to quench the flame of natural love and sensualism, to know that hour is blessed when on his worthless days the fronded hand of death shall set its seal. Yet fear the cure, though hating the disease. The one is man that shall hereafter be, the other man as vice has made him now. War is the statesman's game, the priest's delight, the lawyer's jest, the hired assassin's trade. And to those royal murderers, whose mean thrones are bought by crimes of treachery and gore, the bread they eat, the staff on which they lean, guards garbed in blood-red liveries surround their palaces, participate the crimes that force defends, and from a nation's rage secure the crown, which all the cursors reach, that famine, frenzy, woe, and penury breathe. These are the hired bravos who defend the tyrant South, the bullies of his fear. These are the sinks and channels of worst vice, the refuse of society, the dregs of all that is most vile. Their cold hearts blend with deceit and sternness, ignorance with pride, all that is mean and villainous with rage, which hopelessness of good and self-contempt alone might kindle. They are decked in wealth, honor, and power, then are sent abroad to do their work. The pestilence that stalks in gloomy triumph through some eastern land is less destroying. They cajole with golden promises of fame. The thoughtless youth already crushed with servitude, he knows his wretchedness too late, and cherishes repentance for his ruin, when his doom is sealed in gold and blood. Those too the tyrants serve, who, skilled to snare the feet of justice and the toils of law, stand ready to oppress the weaker still, and right or wrong will vindicate for gold, sneering at public virtue, which beneath their pitiless tread lies torn and trampled, where honor sits smiling at the sale of truth. Then grave and hoary-headed hypocrites, without a hope, passion, or love, who through a life of luxuries and lies have gripped flattery to the seats of power, support the system whence their honors flow. They have 3 words, while tyrants know their use, will pay them for the loan with usury, torn from a bleeding word, God, hell, and heaven. A vengeance, pitiless and almighty field, whose mercy is a nickname for the rage of tameless tigers hungering for blood. Hell, a red gulf of everlasting fire, where poisonous and undying worms prolong eternal misery to those hapless slaves, whose life is meant a peasant's for its crimes. And heaven, a meed for those who dare belie their human nature, quake, believe, and cringe before the mockeries of earthly power. These the tools tyrant tempers to his work, wields in his wrath as he wills, destroys, omnipotent in wickedness the while. Youth springs, age molders, manhood tamely does his bidding, bribed by short-lived joys to lend force to the weakness of his trembling arm. His bidding. They rise, they fall, one generation comes, yielding its harvest to destruction's scythe. It fades, another blossoms, yet, behold, red glows the winter's time-stamp mark on its bloom, withering and cankering deep its passive prime. He has invented lang words and modes, empty and vain is his own coreless heart. Evasive meanings, nothing of much sound, to lure the heedless victims to the toils spread round the valley of its paradise. Look to thyself, priest, conqueror, or prince, whether thy trade is falsehood and thy lust deep wallow in the earnings of the poor, with whom thy master was, or who thou delightest in numbing o'er the myriads of thy slain. On misery weighing nothing in scale, against thou short-lived, or thou dost load with cowardice and crime the groaning load. A palm-fed king, look to thy wretched self. Art thou not the very slave that e'er crawled on the loathing earth? Are not thy days of unsatisfying listlessness? Dost thou not cry ere night's long rack is o'er? When will morning come? Is not thy youth a vain and feverish dream of sensualism? Thy manhood blighted with unripe disease? Are not thy views unregretted death, drear, comfortless, and horrible? Thy mind is not morbid as thy nerveless frame, incapable of judgment, hope, or love? And dost thou wish the errors to survive that bar thee from thy sympathies of good, after the miserable interest thou hold'st in their protection? When the grave has swallowed up thy memory and thyself, dost thou desire the bane that poisons earth to twine its roots around thy coffin clay, spring from thy bones, and blossom on thy tomb, that of its fruit thy babies may eat and die? 5. Thus do the generations of earth go to the grave, and issue from the womb, surviving still the imperishable change that renovates the world. Even as the leaves which the keen frost wind of the waning year has scattered on the forest floor and heaped for many seasons there, though long they choke, loading with loathsome rottenness the land, all germs of promise, yet when the tall trees from which they fell, shorn of their lovely shakes, lie level with the earth to moulder there, they fertilize the land they long to form, till from the breathing lawn a forest springs of youth, integrity, and loveliness, like that which gave it life to spring and die. This suicidal selfishness that blights the fairest feelings of the opening heart is destined to decay, whilst from the soil shall spring all virtue, all delight, all love, and judgment cease to wage unnatural war with passion's unsubduable array. Twin sister of religion, selfishness, rival in crime and falsehood, aping all the wanton horrors of her bloody play. Yet frozen, unimpassioned, spiritless, shunning the delight, and owning not its name, compelled by its deformity to screen with flimsy veil of justice and of right its unattractive lineaments that scare all, save the brood of ignorance, at once the cause and effect of tyranny, unblushing, hardened, sensual, and vile, dead to all love but that of objectness, with heart impassive by more noble powers than unshared pleasure, sordid gain, or fame, despising its own miserable being, which still it longs yet fears to disenthrall. Hence commerce springs, the venal interchange of that human heart or nature yield, which wealth should purchase not, but want demand, and natural kindness hath to supply from the full fountain of its boundless love. Forever stifled, drained, and tainted now, commence beneath whose poison breathing shade no solitary virtue dares to spring. But poverty and wealth, with equal hands, scatter their withering curses and unfold the doors of premature and violent death, to pining famine and full-fled disease, to all that shares the lot of human life, which, poisoned body and soul, scarce drags the chain that lengthens as it goes and clanks behind. Commerce has set the mark of selfishness, the signet of its all-enslaving power, upon a shining ore and called it gold, before whose image bow the vulgar great, the vainly rich, the miserable proud, the mob of peasants, nobles, priests, and kings, and with blind feelings reverence the power that grinds them to the dust of misery. But in the temple of their hireling hearts, gold is a living god, and rules in scorn as earthly things but virtue. Since tyrants by the sale of human life heap luxuries to their sensualism and fame, to their wide-wasting and insatiable prize, success is sanctioned to a credulous world, the ruin, the disgrace, the woe of war. Hosts his blindness and unresisting dupes, the despot numbers from his cabinet those puppets of his schemes he moves at will, even as the slaves by force or famine driven beneath a vulgar master to perform a task of cold and brutal drudgery, hardened to hope, insensible to fear, scathe living pulleys of a dead machine, mere wheels of work and articles of trade that grace the proud and noisy pomp of wealth. The harmony and happiness of man yields to the wealth of nations. That which lifts his nature to the heaven of its pride is bartered for the poison of his soul. The weight that drags to earth his towering hopes, blighting all prospect but of selfish gain, withering all passion but of slavish fear, extinguishing all free and generous love of enterprise and daring, even the pulse that fancy kindles the beating heart to mingle with sensation it destroys, leaves nothing but the sordid lust of self, the groveling hope of interest and gold, unqualified, unmingled, unredeemed, even by hypocrisy. And statesmen boast of wealth. The wordy eloquence that lives after the ruin of their hearts can gild the bitterest poison of a nation's woe, can turn the worship of the servile mob to their corrupt and glorying idol, fame, from virtue trampled by its iron tread, although its dazzling pedestal be raised amidst the horrors of a limb-strewn field, with desolated dwellings of smoking round, the man of ease who by his warm fireside to deeds of charitable intercourse and bare fulfilment of the common laws of decency and prejudice confines the struggling nature of his human heart, is duped by their cold sophistry. He sheds a passing cheer, perchance, upon the wreck of earthly peace, which nears his dwelling's door. The frightful waves are driven when his son is murdered by the tyrant, or religion drives his wife raving mad. But the poor man, whose life is misery and fear and care, who the morn wakens but the fruitful toil, whoever hears his famished offspring scream, who their pale mother's uncomplaining gaze forever meets, and the proud rich man's eye flash in command, and the heartbreaking scene of thousands like himself, he little heeds the rhetoric of tyranny. His hate is quenchless as his wrongs. He laughs to scorn the bitter mockery of words, feeling the horror of the tyrant's deeds. And unrestrained but by the arm of power that knows and dreads his enmity, the iron rod of penury still compels a rigid slave to bow the knee to wealth and poison with unprofitable toil. A life too void of solace to confirm the very chains that bind him to his doom. Nature, impartial in munificence, has gifted man with all subduing will. Matter with all its transitory shapes lies subjected and plastic at his feet, that weak from bondage trembles as they tread. How many a rustic Milton has passed by, stifling the speechless longings of his heart in unremitting drudgery and care. How many a vulgar Cato has compelled his energies, no longer tameless then, to mold a pin or fabricate a nail? How many a Newton whose passive ken the mighty spears that gem infinity were only specks of tinsel fixed in heaven to light the midnights of his native town? Yet every heart contains perfection's germ, the wisest of the sages of the earth, that ever from the scores of reason drew science and truth and virtue's treadless tone, were what a weak and inexperienced boy, proud, sensual, unimpassioned, unimbued with pure desire and universal love, compared to that high being of cloudless brain, untainted passion, elevated will, which death, who even would linger long and all with his noble presence and beneath his changeless eye-beam, might alone subdue. Him every slave now dragging through the filth of some corrupted city sad with life, pining with famine, swollen with luxury, blunted with the keenness of his spiritual sense, with narrow schemings and unworthy cares, or madly rushing through all violent crime to move the deepest stagnation of his soul, might imitate and equal. But mean lust has bound its chain so tight around the earth, that all within it but the virtuous man is venal. Gold or fame will surely reach the price prefixed by selfishness, till all but him of resolute and unchanging will, whom nor the plaudits of a servile pride, nor the vile joys of tainting luxury, contrive to yield his elevated soul to tyranny or falsehood, though they wield with blood-red hand the sceptre of the world. All things are sold. The very light of heaven is venal. Earth's unsparing gifts of love, the smallest and most despicable things that lurk in the abysses of the deep, all objects of our life, even life itself, and the poor pittance which the law allows of liberty, the fellowship of man, those duty which his heart of human love should urge him to perform instinctively, are bought and sold as in a public mart of undisguised selfishness that sets on each price the stamp mark of her reign. Even love is sold, the solace of all woe, is turned to deadliness, agony, old age shivers in selfish beauty's loathing arms, and youth's corrupted impulses prepare a life of horror from the blighting bane of commerce, while the pestilence that springs from unenjoying sensualism has filled all human life with hydra-headed woes. Falsehood demands but gold to pay the pangs of outraged conscience, for the slavish priest sets no great value on his hireling faith. A little passing pomp, some servile souls whom cowardice itself might safely chain, or the spare might of avarice could bribe to deck the triumph of their languid zeal, and make a ministry to tyranny. More daring crime requires a loftier meed. Without a shudder, the slave soldier lends his arm to murderous deeds and steels its heart, when the dread eloquence of dying men, low mingling on the lonely field of fame, assails that nature who applause he sells for the gross blessings of a patriot mob, for the vile gratitude of heartless kings, and for the cold world's good word, viler still. There is a nobler glory, which survives until our being fades, and surlacing all human care accompanies its change. Deserts not virtue in the dungeon's gloom, and in the precincts of the palace guides its footsteps through that labyrinth of crime. Imbues his lineaments with dauntlessness, even when from power's avenging hand he takes its sweetest, last, and noble title, death. The consciousness of good, which neither gold nor sordid fame nor hope of heavenly bliss can purchase, but a life of resolute good. Unalterable will, quenchless desire of universal happiness, the heart that beats with it in unison, the brain, whose ever wakeful wisdom toils to change reason-rich stores for its eternal weal. This commerce of sincerest virtue needs no mediative signs of selfishness, no jealous intercourse of wretched gain, no balancings of prudence, cold and long, in just and equal measure all is weighed. One scale contains the sum of human weal, and one the good man's heart. How vainly seek the selfish for the happiness denied to aught but virtue. Blind and hardened they who hope for peace amid the storms of care, who covet power they know not how to use, and sigh for pleasure they refuse to give, madly they frustrate still their own designs. And where they hope that quiet to enjoy which virtue pictures, bitterness of soul, pining regrets, and vain repentances, disease, disgust, and lassitude pervade their valueless and miserless lives. But hoary-headed selfishness has felt its death blow, and is tottering to the grave. A brighter morn awaits the human day, when every transfer of earth's natural gifts shall be a commerce of good words and works. When poverty and wealth, the thirst of fame, the fear of infamy, disease, and woe, war with its million horrors and feast hell, shall live in but the memory of time, who, like a penitent libertine, shall start, look back, and shudder at his younger years. Oh, begod, I think I need some more tea. All right. Section 6, the first book, Queen Mab, by Shelley. A little bit of Earl Grey this time. All touch, all eye, all ear. The spirit felt the fairy's burning speech or the thin texture of its frame. The varying periods painted changing glows, as on a summer even when soul-enfolding music floats around. The stainless mirror of the lake reimagines the eastern gloom, mingling convulsively its purple hues. When sunsets burnish gold, then thus spoke the spirit, is a wild and miserable world, thorny and full of care, which every fiend can make his prey at will. O fairy, in the lapse of years, is there no hope in store? Will yon vast sun roll on interminably, still illumining the night of so many wretched souls, and see no hope for them? Will not the universal spirit e'er revivify this withered limb of heaven? The fairy calmly smiled in comfort, and a kindling gleam of hope suffused the spirit's lineaments. O resting thee tranquil, chase those fearful doubts, which ne'er could rack an everlasting soul, that sees the chains which bind it to its doom. Yes, crime and misery are in yonder earth, falsehood, mistake, and lust, but the eternal world contains at once the evil and the cure. Some eminent in virtue shall start up, even in perversest time. The truth of their pure lips that never die shall bind the scorpion falsehood with a wreath of ever-living flame, until the monster sting itself to death. How sweet a scene the earth will become, of purest spirits, a pure dwelling place, symphonious to the planetary spheres, when man, with changeless nature coalescing, will undertake regeneration's work, when in ungenial poles no longer point to the red and baleful sun that faintly twinketh there. Spirit, on yon earth, falsehood now triumphs, deadly power has fixed its seal upon the truth. Madness and misery are there, the happiest is most wretched, yet confide in pure health drops from cup of joy, fall like a dew of balm upon the world. Now the scene I show in silence turn, and read the blood-stained charter of all will, which nature soon with recreating hand will blot in mercy from the book of earth. How bold the flight of passion's wandering wing, how swift the step of reason's firmer tread, how calm and sweet the victories of life, how terrorless the triumph of the grave. How powerless were the mightiest monarch's arm, vain his loud threat, and impotent his frown, how ludicrous the priest's dogmatic roar. The weight of his exterminating curse, how light, and his affecting charity to suit the pressure of the changing times with palpable deceit. But for thy aid, religion, but for thee, prolific fiend, whose peopless earth with demons, hell with men, and heaven with slaves. Thou taintest all thou look upon, the stars which thy cradle gleam so brightly sweet, regards not the distempered playfulness of thy untutored infancy. The trees, the grass, the clouds, the mountains, and the sea, all living things that walk, swing, creep, or fly, were gods the sun had homage, and the moon her worshipper. Then becomest a boy, more adoring in thy frenzies every shape, vast or monstrous, or beautifully wild, which, from sensation's relic, fancy calls the spirits of the air, the shuddering ghosts, the genii of the elements, the powers that give a shape to nature's various work. Had life and place in the corrupt belief of thy blind heart? Yet still thy youthful hands were pure of human blood. Then manhood gave its strength and ardor to thy frenzied brain. Thine eager gaze scanned the stupendous scene, whose wonder mocks the knowledge of thy pride. Their everlasting and unchanging laws reproached thine ignorance, while thou stoodest, baffled and gloomy, thou didst sum up. The elements of all thou didst know, the changing seasons, winter's lifeless rain, the budding of the heaven-breathing trees, the eternal orbs that beautify the night, the sunrise and the setting moon, earthquakes and wars, poisons and disease, and all their causes to an abstract point, converging thou didst bend and call it God, the self-sufficing, the omnipotent, the merciful, and the avenging God, who, prototype of human misrule, sits high in heaven's realm upon a golden throne, even like an earthly king, in whose dread work hell gapes open for the unhappy slaves of fate, whom he created in his sport, to triumph in their torments when they fell. Earth heard the name. Earth trembled as the smoke as his friend ascended to heaven, blotting the constellations, and the cries of millions butchered in sweet confidence and unsuspecting peace, even when the bonds of safety were confirmed by wordy deeds sworn in his dreadful name, rung through the land, while innocent babes writhed on thy stubborn spear, and thou didst laugh to hear the monster shriek. A manic gladness as the sacred steel felt cold in her torn entrails? Religion? Thou wert then in manhood's prime, but age crept on. What God would not suffice for senile puerility, thou framest a tale to suit thy dotage, and to glut thy misery-thirsting soul, that the mad fiend thy wickedness had pictured might afford a plea for sating the unnatural thirst for murder, rapine, violence, and crime that still consumed thy being, even when thou heardst the step of fate, that flames might light thy funeral pile, and the shrill horrent shrink of parents dying on that pile that burned to light their children to thy past. The roar of the encircling flames, the exulting cries of thine apostles, loud commingling there, might sate thine hungry ear, even on the bed of death. But now contempt is mocking thy grey hairs. Thou art descending to the darksome grave, unhonored and unpitied, but by those whose pride is passing by like thine, and sheds, like thine, a glare that fades before the sun of truth, and shines but in the dreadful night that long hath lowered above the ruined world. Throughout these infinite orbs of mingling light, of which yon earth is one, is widely diffused a spirit of activity and life that knows no term, cessation, or decay, that fades not when the lamp of earthly life extinguished in the dampness of the grave, while there slumbers more than when the babe in the dim newness of its being feels the impulses of sublunary things. All is wonder to an unpracticed sense, but active, steadfast, and eternal still guides the fierce whirlwind in the tempest roars, cheers in the day, breathes in the balmy grove, strengthens in health and poisons in disease. And in the storm of change that ceaselessly rolls the eternal universe and shakes its undecaying battlements, presides apportioning with irresistible law the place each spring of its machine shall fill, so that when waves on waves tumultuous heap confusion to the crowds, and fiercely driven heaven's lightning scorch the unprotected ocean fords, whilst to the eye of shipwrecked mariner, lone sitting on the barren shuddering rock, all seems unlikely contingency and chance. No atom of this turbulence fulfills an egg in unsuscitated tact, or acts but as it must ought to act, even in the minutest molecule of light. Then, in the April sunbeam's fleeting glow, fulfills its destined, though invisible work. The universal spirit guides, no less when merciless ambition or mad zeal has led two hosts of dupes to a battlefield, that blind they may dig each other's graves, and all the sad glory does it rule all passions, not a thought, a will, an act, no working of the tyrant's moody mind, nor one misgiving of the slaves who boast their servitude to hide the shame they feel, nor the events enchanting every will, that from the depths of unrecorded time have drawn all influencing virtue, pass unrecognized or unforeseen by thee, soul of the universe, eternal spring of life and death, of happiness and woe, of all that checkers the phantasmal scene, that floats before our eyes in wavering light, which gleams but on the darkness of our prison, whose chains and massy walls we feel but cannot see. Spirit of nature, all-sufficing power and necessity, thou mother of the world, unlike the god of human arrow, thou requirest no prayers or praises. The caprice of man's weak will belongs no more to thee than do the changeful passings of his breast To thy unvarying harmony, the slave, whose horrible lust spread misery o'er the world, and the good man, who lifts with virtuous pride his being in the sight of happiness, that brings from his own works the poison tree, beneath whose shade all life is withered up, and the fair oak, whose leafy dome affords a temple, where the vows of happy love are registered, are equal in thy sight. No love, no hate thou cherishest, revenge and favoritism, the worst desire of fame, thou know'st not. All the wide world contains are but thy passive instruments, and thou regardest them with impartial eye, whose joy or pain thy nature cannot feel, because thou not hast human sense, because thou art not human mind. Yes, when the sweeping storm of time has sung its death dirge o'er the ruined fanes and broken altars of the almighty fiend, whose name usurps thy honors, and the blood through centuries clotted there has flown down the tainted floods of ages, shalt thou live unchangeable. A shrine is raised to thee, which nor thy tempest breath of time, or interminable flood, or earth's light paging roll, availeth to destroy. The sensitive extension of the world, that wondrous and eternal fane, where pain and pleasure, good and evil join, to do the will of strong necessity, and life, in multitudinous shape, still pressing forward where no term can be, like humry and unresisting flame, curls round the eternal columns of its strengths. 7. Spirit. I was an infant when my mother went to see an atheist burned. She took me there. The dark-robed priests were met around the pile. The multitude was gazing silently. And as the culprit passed with dauntless mien, tempered disdain in his unaltering eye, mixed with quiet smile, shone calmly forth. The thirsty fire crept round his manly limbs. His redolent eyes were scorched to blindness soon. His death-tang rained my heart. The insensate mob uttered a cry of triumph, and I wept. "Weep not, child," cried my mother, "for that man has said there is no God." Fairy. There is no God. Nature confirms the faith his death-grown sealed. The heaven and earth, let man's revolving race, his ceaseless generations tell their tale. Let every part depending on the chain that links it to the whole point to the hand that grasps its term. Let every seed that falls in silent eloquence unfold its store of argument, infinity within, infinity without, belie creation. The external spirit it contains is nature's only God, but human pride is skillful to invent the most serious names to hide its ignorance. The name of God has fent about all crimes with holiness, himself the creature of his worshippers, whose names and attributes and passions change. Wow, this is hardcore. Siva, Buddha, foe, Jehovah, God our Lord, even with the human dupes who build his shrines, still serving o'er their war-polluted worlds for desolation's watchword, where their hosts stain his death-blessing chariot wheels as on triumphantly they roll, whilst Brahman raise a sacred hymn to mingle with the groans, or countless partners of his power divide his tyranny to weakness, or the smoke of burning towers, the cries of female helplessness, unarmed old age, and youth and infancy horribly massacred, descend to honor, to heaven and honor his name, or, last in worth, earth groans beneath the religion's iron age, and priests dare babble of a God of peace, even while their hands were red with guiltless blood, murdering the while, uprooting every germ of truth, exterminating, spoiling all, making the earth a slaughterhouse. O Spirit, through thy sense by which thy inner nature was apprised, of outward shows vague dreams have roiled, and varied reminiscences have waked, tablets that never fade. All things have been imprinted there, the stars, the sea, the earth, the sky, even the unshapeliest lineaments of wild and fleeting visions have left a record there to testify of earth. These are my empire. For me is given the wonders of human world to keep, and fancy's thin creations to endow with matter, being, and reality. Therefore a wondrous phantom from the dreams of human's error, dense and pure-blind faith. I will evoke to meet thy question. Asasrus lies. A strange and woe-worn wight arose beside the battlement, and stood unmoving there. His essential figure cast no shade upon the golden floor. His port and mien bore mark of many years, and chronicles of untold ancientness. All right, took me an hour to break. Gonna take a pause here. Start that again. A strange and woe-worn wight arose beside the battlement and stood unmoving there. His inessential figure cast no shade upon the golden floor. His port and mien bore the mark of many years, and chronicles of untold ancientness were legible within his beamless eye. Yet his cheek bore the mark of youth, freshness and vigor knit his manly frame. This wisdom of old age was mingled there with youth's primeval dauntlessness, and inexpressible woe, chastened by fearless resignation, gave an also grace to his all-speaking brow. Spirit, is there a God? Aye. Is there a God? Aye, an almighty God. And vengeful as Almighty, once his voice was heard on earth shuddered at the sound. The fiery vision firmament expressed abhorrence, and the grave of nature yawned to swallow all the dauntless and the good that dare hurl defiance at his throne, girt as it was with power. None but slaves survived, cold-blooded slaves, who did the work of tyrannous omnipotence, whose souls no honest indignation ever urged to elevated daring, to one deed which gross and sensual self did not pollute. These slaves built temples for the omnipotent feet, gorgeous and vast. The costly altars smoked with human blood, and hideous paeans rung through the long-drawn aisles. A murderer heard his voice in Egypt, one whose gifts and arts had raised him to eminence and power. Accomplice of omnipotence and crime, and confident of thy all-knowing one. These were Jehovah's words. From an eternity of idleness, I, God, awoke in 7 days' toil, and made earth from nothing, rested and created man. I placed him in paradise, and there planted the tree of evil, so that he might eat and perish. My soul secure wherewith to saint its malice, and to turn even like a heartless conqueror of the earth all misery to my fame. The race of men chosen to my honor with impunity may sate the lusts I planted in their heart. Here I commend thee hence to lead them on, until with hardened feet their conquering troops weigh down the promised soil through woman's blood, and make my name be dreaded through the land. Yet even burning flame and ceaseless woe shall be the doom of eternal souls, with every soul on this ungrateful earth, virtuous or vicious, weak and strong. Even all shall perish to fill the blind revenge, which you to men call justice, of their God. The murderer's brow quivered with horror. God omnipotent, is there no mercy? Must our punishment be endless? Will long ages roll away and see no term? Oh, wherefore hast thou made a mockery and wrath of this evil earth? Mercy becomes the powerful, but be but just. O God, repent and save. One way remains. One way remains. I will beget a son, and he shall bear the sins of all the world. He shall rise in this unnoticed corner of the earth, and he'll die upon a cross and purge the universal crime, so that the few on whom my grace descends, those who are marked as vessels to the honor of their God, may credit this strange sacrifice, and save their souls alive. Millions shall live and die, when they are called upon their Saviour's name, but unredeemed to the gaping grave. Thousands shall deem it an old woman's tale, such as the nurses tritons babes withal. These, in a gulf of anguish and of flame, shall curse their reprobation endlessly. Yet tenfold pangs shall force them to avow, even on their beds of torment, where they howl my honor and the justice of their doom. What then shall avail their virtuous deeds, their thoughts of purity with radiant genius bright, or lit with human reason's earthly ray? Many are called, but few I will elect. Do thy bidding, my Moses. Even the murderous chink was blanched with horror, and quivering lips scarefully uttered, O Almighty One, I tremble and obey. O Spirit, centuries have set their seal on this the heart of many wounds and loaded brain. Since the incarnate came, humbly he came, veiling his horrible godhead to the shape of man, scorned by the world, his name unheard, save by the rabble of his own native town. Even as a perished demigod, he led the crowd, he taught them justice, truth, and peace. In semblance, but he lit it within their souls, the quenchless flames of zeal, and blessed the sword he brought on earth to satiate with blood of truth, of freedom, his malignant soul. At length his mortal frame was led to death. I stood beside him on the torturing cross. No pain assailed his unterrestrial sense, and yet he groaned. Indignantly I summed the massacres and miseries which his name had sanctioned in my country, and I cried, Go, go, in mockery. A smile of godlike malice re-illumined his fading lineaments. I go, he cried, but thou shalt wander o'er the unquiet earth eternally. The dampness of the grave bathed my imperishable front. I fell, and long lay tranced upon the charmed soil. When I awoke, hell burned within my brain, which staggered in its seat, For all around the moldering relics of my kindred lay, even as the Almighty's ire arrested them. And their various attitudes of death, my murdered children's mute and eyeless skulls, glared ghastly upon me. But my soul, from sight and sense of the polluting way of tyranny, had long learned to prefer hell's freedom to the servitude of heaven. Therefore I rose and dauntlessly began my lonely and unending pilgrimage, resolving to wage unwearable war with my almighty tyrant and to hurl defiance at his impotence to harm beyond the curse I bore. The very hand that barred my passage to the peaceful grave had crushed the earth of misery and given its empire to the chosen of his slaves. These I have seen, even from the earliest dawn, of weak, unstable, and precarious power. Then preaching peace as now they practice war. So when they turn but from the massacre of unoffending infidels to quench their thirst for ruin in the very blood that flowed in their own veins, and pitiless zeal froze every human life, as the wife sheathed her husband's heart in the sacred steel, even while its hopes were dreaming of her love. And friends to friends, brothers to brothers, stood opposed in bloodiest battlefield and war, scarce satiable by fate's last draught, waged, drunk from the winepress of the Almighty's wrath, whilst the red cross and mockery of peace pointed to victory. When the fray was done, no remnant of the exterminated face survived to tell its ruin, but the flesh with putrid smoke poisoning the atmosphere that rotted on the half-extinguished pile. Yes, I have seen God's worshippers unsheathe the sword of his revenge when grace descended, confirming all non-natural impulses to sanctify their desolating deeds. And frantic priests waved the ill-omened cross o'er the unhappy earth. Then shone the sun on showers of gore from the upflashing seal of safe assassination, and all cry made stingless by the Spirit of the Lord, and blood-red rainbows canopied the land. Spirit, no year of my eventful being is passed unsustained by crime and misery, which flows from God's own faith. I've marked his slaves with tongues whose lies are venomous, beguile the insensate mod, and while one hand was red with murder fain to stretch the other out for brotherhood and peace, and they now babble of love and mercy, while their deeds are marked with all the narrowness and crime that freedom's young arm dare not yet chastise. Reason may claim our gratitude who now establish the imperishable throne of truth and stubborn virtue, making vain the unprevailing malice of my foe, whose bootless rage heaps torment for the brave, adds impotent eternities to pain, whilst keenest disappointment racks his breast, to see the smiles of peace around them play, to frustrate or sanctify their doom. Thus I have stood through a wild waste of years, struggling with whirlwinds of mad agony, yet peaceful and serene in selfish rhyme, mocking my powerless tyrant's horrible curse, with stubborn and unalterable will, even as a giant oak with heaven's fierce flame has scathed in the willingness to stand a monument of faithfulness ruined there. Yet peaceably and movelessly it braves the midnight conflict of the wintry storm, as in the sunlight's calm it spreads its worn and withered arms on high to meet the quiet of a summer's noon. The fairy waved her hand. Ahasuerus fled, fast to the shape of mingled shade and mist that lurk in the glens of a twilight grove, flee from the morning beam, the matter of which dreams are made, no more empowered with actual life than the phantasmal portraiture of wandering human thought. The fairy. The present and the past thou hast beheld. It was a desolate sight. No spirit learned the secrets of the future. Time, unfold the brooding pinion of thy gloom. Render thou up the half-devoured babes, and from the cradles of eternity, while millions lie lulled in their portioned sleep by the deep murmuring stream of passing things, tear thou the gloomy shroud. Spirit, behold thy glorious destiny. Joy to the spirit came through the wide rent in time's eternal veil. Hope was seen beaming through the mists of fear. Earth was no longer hell. Love, freedom, health had given their ripeness to the manhood of its prime, and all its pulses beat, symphonious to the planetary spheres. The dulcet music swelled, concordant with the life strings of the soul. It throbbed in sweet and languid beatings there, catching new life from transitory death, like the vague sighings of a wind at even that wakes the wavelets of the slumbering sea and dies at the creation of its breath, and sinks and raises, falls and swells by fits, was a pure stream of feeling that sprung from these sweet notes, and o'er the spirit's human sympathies with mild and gentle motion calmly flowed. Joy to the spirit came, such love as when a lover sees those chosen of his soul in happiness, and witnesses her peace. whose woe to him were bitterer than death, sees her unfading cheek glow mantling in the first luxury of health, thrills with her lovely eyes, which, like two stars amid the heaving main, sparkles through liquid bliss. Then in her triumph spoke the fairy queen. I will not call the ghost of ages gone to unfold the fiery secrets of its lore. The present, now, is past, and those events that desolate the earth have faded from the memory of time. Who dares not give reality to that those who being I annul? To me is given the wonders of the human world to keep. Space, matter, time, and mind, futurity, exposes now its treasure. Let the sight renew and strengthen all thy failing hope. O human spirit, spear thee to thy goal, where virtue fixes universal peace. Amidst the ebb and flow of human things, show somewhat stable, somewhat certain still. A lighthouse o'er the wild and dreary waves, the habitable earth is full of bliss. Though wastes of frozen billows that were hurled by everlasting snowstorms round the poles, where matter dared not vegetate or live, but ceaseless frosts round the vast solitude bound its broad zone of stillness, are unloosed. And fragrant zephyrs there from icy isles ruffled the placid ocean deep that rolls its broad bright surges to the sloping sand, whose roar is wakened into echoing sweet to murmur through the heaven-breathing groves and melodize with man's blessed nature there. Those deserts of immeasurable sand, whose age-collected fervor scarce allowed a bird to live, a blade of grass to spring, where the shrill chirp of the green lizard's love broke on the sultry silentness alone, now teem with countless rills and shady woods, cornfields, and pastures and white cottages, and where the startled wilderness behold a savage conqueror stained in kindred blood, a tigress sating with the flesh of lambs. The unnatural famine of our toothless cubs, while stouts and howlings through the desert rang, sloping and smooth the daisy-spangling lawn, over sweet incense to the sunrise smiles, to sue a babe before his mother's door, sharing his morning's meal, with the green and golden basilisk that comes to lick his feet. Those trackless deeps where many a weary sail has seen above the illimitable pain, morning and night, and not on morning whiles, while no land to greet the wanderer spread its shadowy mountains on the sun-bright sea, or the loud roarings of the tempest waves so long have mingled with the gusty wind, and melancholy loneliness and swept the desert of those ocean solitudes, but vocal to the seabird's harrowing shriek, the bellowing monster and the rushing storm, now to the sweet and many mingling sounds of kindliest human impulses respond. Those lonely realms bright garden aisles begem, with lightsome clouds and shining seas between, and fertile valleys resonant with bliss, while green woods overcanopy the wave, which like toil-worn laborer leaps to shore to meet the kisses of flowerets there. All things are recreated, and the flame of Constantius inspires all life. The fertile bosom of the earth gives suck to myriads who still grow beneath her care, rewarding her with pure perfectness. The balmy breathings of the wind inhale her virtues and diffuse them all around. Health floats amid the gentle atmosphere, glows in the fruits and mantles of the stream. No storms deform the beaming brow of heaven, nor scatter in the freshness of its prize the foliage of the ever-verdant trees. But fruits are ripe, flowers ever fair, and autumn proudly bears her matron grace, kindling a flush on the fair cheek of spring, whose virgin bloom beneath the ruddy fruit reflects its tint and blushes into love. The lion now forgets its thirst for blood. There might you see him sporting in the sun beside the dreadless kid. His claws are sheathed, his teeth are harmless, custom's force has made his nature the nature of a lamb. Like passion's fruit, the nightshade's tempting bane poisons no more the pleasure it bestows. All bitterness is past. The cup of joy and mingled mantles to the goblet's brim, and courts the thirsty lips it fled before. But chief, ambiguous man, he that can know more misery and dream more joy than all, whose keen sensations thrill within his breast to mingle with loftier instinct there, lending their power to pleasure and to pain, yet raising, sharpening, and refining each, who stands amid the ever-varying world. The burden or the glorying of the earth, he chief perceives the change, his being notes the gradual renovation, and defines each movement of his progress to in his mind. Man, where the gloom of the long polar night lowers over the snow-clad rocks and frozen soil, where scarce the hardiest herb that braved the frost basks in the moonlight's ineffectual well, shrank with the plants and darkened with the light, his chilled and narrow energies, his heart insensible to courage, truth, or love, his stunted nature and imbecile frame marked him from the some abortion of the earth, fit compared to the boars that roamed around, whose habits and enjoyments were his own. His life a feverish dream of stagnant woe, whose meagre wants but scantily fulfilled, apprised him ever of the joyless length which his short being's wretchedness had reached. His death a pang which famine, cold, and toil long on the mind, whilst yet the vital spark clung to the body stubbornly, had brought. All was inflicted here that earth's revenge could wreak on the infringers of her law. One curse alone was spared, the name of God. Nor were the tropics bound in the realms of day with the broad belt of mingling cloud and flame, where the blue mist through the unmoving atmosphere scattered seeds of pestilence and fed on natural vegetation. Where the land teemed with all earthquakes, tempest, and disease, was man a noble being. Slavery had crushed him to his country's blood-stained dust, or he was bartered for the fame of power, with all internal impulses destroying, makes human will an article of trade. Or he was changed with Christians for their gold, and dragged to the distant isles, where the sound of mangling scourge. He does the work of all polluting luxury and wealth, which doubly visits on the tyrant's head the long protracted fullness of their woe. Or he was led to legal butchery, to turn to worms beneath the burning sun, where kings first learned against the rights of men, and priests first traded with the name of God. Even where the milder zone afforded man a seeming shelter, yet contagion there, blighting his being with innumerable ills, spread like a quenchless fire. Nor truth too late availed to arrest its progress, or create that peace which first in bloodless victory claimed her snowy standard o'er the favored clime. There man was long the train-bearer of slaves, the mimic of surrounding misery, the jackal of ambition's lion rage, the bloodhound of religion's hungry zeal. Here, now, the human being stands adorning this loveliest earth with taintless body and mind, blessed from his birth with all bland impulses, which gently in his noble bosom wake all kindly passions and all pure desires. Him still from hope to the bliss pursuing, which from exhaustless lore of human weal, dawns on the virtuous mind. The thoughts that rise in time destroying infiniteness gift with self-enshrined eternity that mocks the unprevailing hoariness of age. And man, once fleeing over the transient scene, swift as an unremembered vision, stands immortal upon earth. No longer now he slays the lamb that looks him in the face, and horribly devours his mangled flesh, which, still avenging nature's broken law, kindled all putrid humors in his frame. All evil passions and all vain belief, hatred, despair, and loathing in his mind, the germs of misery, death, disease, and crime, no longer now the winged habitants that in the woods their sweet lives sway, flee from the form of man, but gather round and prune their sunny feathers on the hands which little children stretch in friendly sport toward these dreadless partners of their play. All things are void of terror. Man has lost his terrible prerogative and stands, an equal amidst equals, happiness and science dawn through late upon the earth. Peace cheers the mind, health renovates the frame, disease and pleasure cease to mingle here, reason and passion cease to combat there, while each enfettered o'er the earth extend their all-subduing energies and wield the scepter of a vast dominion there. Whilst every shape and mode of matter lends its force to the omnipotence of mind, from which its dark mind drags the gem of truth to decorate its paradise of peace. 9. O happy earth, O reality of heaven, to which those restless souls that ceaselessly throng through human universe aspire, thou consummation of a mortal hope. The glorious prize of blithely working will, whose rays, diffused throughout all space and time, verge to one point and blend there forever, of purest spirits without dwelling place, where care and sorrow, impotence and crime, languor, disease, and ignorance dare not come. O happy earth, reality of heaven, genius has seen thee in thy passionate dreams, and dim forebodings of thy loveliness haunting the human hearts have there entwined. Those rooted hopes of some sweet peace of bliss, whose friends and lovers meet to part no more. Thou art at the end of desire and will, the product of all action, and the souls that by their paths of aspiring change have reached thy haven of perpetual peace, their rest from the eternity of toil that framed the fabric of thy perfections. Every time the conqueror flee thee in his fear, that hoary giant who in lonely pride so long hath ruled the world, the nation fells beneath his violent footsteps. Pyramids that for millenniums had withstood the tide of human things, his storm-breath drove in sand across a desert where their stones survived, the name of him whose pride had heaped them there. Yon monarch in his solitary pomp was but the mushroom of a summer day, that his light-winged footstep pressed to dust. Time was the king of earth, all things gave way before him, but the fixed and virtuous will. the sacred sympathies of soul and sense that mocked his fury and prepared his fall. Yet slow and gradual dawned the morn of love. Long lay the clouds of darkness o'er the scene, till from its native heaven they rolled away. First crime triumphant over all hope careered, unblushing, none disguising, bold and strong, whilst falsehood, tricked in virtue's attributes, long sanctifies all deeds of vice and woe. To done by her own venomous sting to death, she left the moral world without a law, no longer fettering passion's fearless wing, nor searing reason with the brand of God. Then steadily the happy ferment worked. Reason was free, and wild though passion went through tangled glens and wood embosomed meads, gathering a garland of the strangest flowers, yet like the bee returning to her queen, she bound the sweetest on her sister's brow, whom weak and sober kissed the sportive child, no longer trembling at the broken rod. Mild was the slow necessity of death, the tranquil spirit framed beneath its grasp without a groan, almost without a fear, calm as a voyager to some distant land, and full of wonder, full as hope as he. The deadly germs of languor and disease died in the human frame, and purity blessed with all gifts of her earthly worshippers. How vigorous then was the athletic form of age! How clear its open and unwrinkled brow, when neither avarice, cunning, pride, nor care had stamped the seal of deformity on all the mingling lineaments of time! How lovely the intrepid front of youth, which meek-eyed courage with freshest grace, courage of soul that dreaded not a name, and elevated will that journeyed on through life's phantasmal scene in fearlessness, with virtue, love, and pleasure hand in hand. Then that sweet bondage which is freedom itself, and rivets with sensation softest ties, the kindest sympathies of human souls, needed no fetters of tyrannic law. Those delicate and timid impulses in nature's primal modesty arose, and with undoubted confidence disclosed the growing longings of its dawning love, unchecked by dull and selfish chastity. That virtue of cheaply virtuousness, who pride themselves in senselessness and frost, no longer prostitution's venom bane, poisoned by the springs of happiness and life. Woman and man, in confidence and love, equal and free and pure together, trod the mountain paths of virtue, which no more would stain with blood from many pilgrims' feet. Then, where through distant ages, long in pride, the palace of the martyr slave had mocked famine's great groan, and penury's silent tear, a heap of crumbling ruins stood, and through year after year their stones upon the field, wakening a lonely echo. And the leaves of the old thorn that on the topmost tower usurped the royal ensign's grandeur shook in the stern storm that swayed the topmost tower, and whispered strange tales in the whirlwind's ear. Low through the lone cathedral's roofless aisles the melancholy winds a death dirge sung. It were a sight awful to see the works of faith in slavery so vast, so sumptuous, yet so perishing withal. Even as the corpse that rests beneath its wall, a thousand mourners deck the pomp of death. Today the breathing marble glows above to decorate its memory, and tongues are busy of its life. Tomorrow worms in silence and in darkness seize their prey. Within this massy prison's moultering courts, fearless and free, the ruddy children played, weaving gay chaplets for their innocent brows, with the green ivy and the red wallflower, that mocked the dungeon's unavailing gloom. The ponderous chains and gratings of strong hour, there rusted amid heaps of broken stone, that mingled slowly with their native earth. There the broad beam of day, which feebly once lighted the cheek of lean captivity with a pale and sickly glare, then freely shone on the pure smiles of infant playfulness. No more the shuddering voice of hoarse despair pealed through the echoing vaults, but soothing notes of ivy-fingered winds and gladsome birds and merriment were resonant abound. Those ruins soon left not a wreck behind. Their elements, wide scattered o'er the globe, to happier shapes were molded, and became ministrant to all blissful impulses. Thus human things were perfected, and earth, even the child beneath its mother loved, was strengthened in all excellence and grew fairer and nobler with each passing year. Now time, his dusky penance o'er the scene, closes in steadfast darkness, and the past fades from our charmed fight. My task is done. Thy lore is learned. Earth's wonders are thine own, with all the fear and all the hope they bring. My spells are past, the present now recurs. Ah me, a pathless wilderness remains, yet unsubdued by man's reclaiming hand. Yet human spirit, bravely hold thy course. Let virtue teach thee firmly to pursue the gradual path of an aspiring change. For birth and life and death and that strangest state before the naked foal found its home, I'll tend to perfect happiness and urge the restless wheels of being on their way, whose flashing spokes, indistinct with infinite life, bicker and burn to gain their destined soul. For birth but wakes the spirit to the sense of outward shows, whose inexperienced shape now modes of passion to its frame may lend. Life is a state of action, and the store of all events is aggregated there, that variegate the eternal universe. Death is a gate of dreariness and gloom that leads to azure isles and beaming skies and happy regions of eternal hope. Therefore, O spirit, fearlessly bear on. Though storms may break the primrose on its stalk, though frost may blight the freshness of its bloom, yet spring's awakening breath will woo the earth, to feed with kindliest dew its favorite flower, that blooms in mossy banks and darksome glens, lighting the greenwood with its sunny smile. Fear not, spirit, death's disrobing hand, so welcome when the tyrant is awake, so welcome when the bigot's hell torch burns. 'Tis but the voyage of a darksome hour. This transient gulf dream of a startling sleep, death is no foe to virtue. Earth has seen love's brightest roses on the scaff of bloom mingling with freedom's fadeless laurels there, and presaging the truth of visioned bliss. Are there not hopes within thee, which this scene of linked and gradual being has confirmed? Whose stingings bade thy heart look further still when the moonlight walk by Henry led, sweetly and sadly didst thou talk of death? And wilt thou rudely tear from them thy breast, listening supinely to a bigot's creed, or tamely crouching to the tyrant's rod, whose iron thongs are red with human gore? Never! But bravely bearing on, thy will is destined to an eternal wage the war with tyranny and falsehood, and uproot the germs of misery from the human heart. Thine is the hand whose piety would soothe the thorny pillow of unhappy crime. His impotence of easy pardon gains, watching its wandering as a friend's disease. Thine is the brow whose mildness will defy its fiercest rage and brave its sternest will, when fenced by power and master of the world. Thou art sincere and good, of resolute mind, free from heart-withing customs cold and true, of passion lofty, pure, and unsubdued. Earth's pride and meanness could not vanquish thee, and therefore art worthy of a boon, which thou hast now received. Virtue shall keep thy footsteps in the path thou hast trod, and many days of beaming hope shall bless thy spotless life of sweet and sacred love. Go, happy one, and give that bosom joy whose sleepless spirits waits to catch light, life, and rapture from thy smile. The fairy waves her wand of charm, speechless with the bliss the spirit mounts the car that rolled beside the battlement, bending her beamy eyes in thankfulness, and again the enchanted steeds were yoked, and the burning wheels inflamed, that steep descent to heaven's untrodden way. Fast and far the chariot flew. The vast and fiery globes that rolled around the fairy's palace gate lessened by slow degrees, and soon appeared such tiny twinkles as the planets' orbs, that their attendant on the solar power with borrowed light pursued their narrower way. Earth floated then below. The chariot paused a moment there. The spirit then descended. The restless coursers pawed the ungenial soil, snuffed the gross air, and then, their errands done, unfurled their pinions to the wind of heaven. The body and the soul united then. A gentle start convulsed Dian's frame. Her veiny eyelids quietly closed. Moveless awhile, the dark blue orbs remained. She looked around in wonder, and beheld Henry, who kneeled in silence by her couch, watching her sleep with looks of speechless love and the bright, beaming stars. All right, Shelley, Queen Mab. Interesting, good stuff. One of the things that I read when I was in college, in a lit class, one of the things that my mother and I read and talked about at length, and we contrasted, humanism and Christianity, and worked through sort of that great dialogue going to the West at that time. And I think it's worth diving back into the classics every once in a while because they rest at the fundament of who we are and how ideas have moved forward until this point. So, dangerous and tumultuous times we live in, you know, and sometimes literature and art and the wisdom of things that have passed before us can give some context. So I'm going to end this and probably go stream something else for a bit, maybe a game of sword. Thank you so much for stopping to listen to me today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will do this intermittently. Read something, probably something like Conan next, some Robert E. Howard or something like that. But Shelley, you have a great day. Thanks for stopping by.